Well, good morning, Jagender Rana here. The product of the day is space liability insurance. Space liability insurance. A broad understanding of space weather is necessary in order to forecast space climatic conditions and determine their impact on space-borne technological systems and human activities on Earth. Now, the sun is the main driver of a space environment which releases violent solar phenomena that travel across the interplanetary medium that may reach our planet. So in India currently there is no domestic space policy governing issues of space liability and insurance. As a result, there is no policy governing the extent to which private entities are liable for damages caused to third parties or to space assets due to their space operations. Both the pending Space Activities Bill 2017 and the recently released draft Space-Based Communication Policy 2020 hold private entities liable for any damage caused due to its space operations and requires such entities to insure itself against any liability accruing from such operations in India or outside India. So both these framework hold private entities solely responsible for any damage caused during space operations, thereby creating an undue burden on private entities, especially a startup with limited financial capacities and resources. So this is special liability insurance cover. India does not have an established space policy governing liability and insurance issues. The pending Space Activities Bill 2017 and the draft Space-Based Communication Policy 2020 held private entities solely liable for any damage caused due to space operations. This creates an undue burden on startups and discourages them from breaking or taking an additional space operations. So as far as this policy is concerned, this cover should include launch coverage for spacecraft and launch vehicles from ignition through spacecraft separation in orbit, post-separation coverage for spacecraft through initial operations, deployment, orbit raising and testing, in orbit coverage for ongoing operations of satellites through their life, coverage for transport users including loss of revenue and extra expenses, coverage for satellite manufacturers for loss of incentives and warranty payments, coverage for launch risk guarantees, specialized coverage for small satellites and unique missions, seamless pre-launch and launch coverage, launch and in-orbit liability coverage. So state guarantee for excess liability claims is there. In major spacefaring nations such as United States, France and Australia, a cap on the quantum of liability is coupled with state guarantee under which state cover the damages exceeding the ceiling amount. In the United States, for instance, if the liability claims exceeds the amount insured by the private entity, the United States government covers the remaining subject to a cap of $1.5 billion. In Australia, the Space Activities Act 1998 requires the Australian government to cover damages in excess of the amount insured by the responsible party, subject to a cap of $3 billion Australian dollar. then the Indians should consider adopting a similar approach whereby the government provides guarantee for any liability claims exceeding the quantum of liability kept for private entities. So, with the additional state guarantee, the quantum of liability for startups and MSMEs can be kept at a lower amount, and any liability claim exceeding that amount can be incurred by the state. This will reduce the burden on private entities, especially startups. So, normal space fund is there. Limitation period for liability claims are also there. Negligence or misconduct of third parties is considered. Space liabilities in India and other countries can be compared like this. Millions of pieces of space debris litter the space, be it defunct satellites, average lifespan of a satellite is 5 to 8 years, or the intentional destruction of satellites through anti-satellite missile testing demonstrated successfully by United States, Russia, China and India. Disaster occurs when any debris traveling at high speed strikes a working satellite spacecraft or falls back on Earth. So there are mechanisms for tracking of more than 5 lakh space debris so that liability can be fixed on the owner of the debris. While there are millions of smaller debris which cannot be tracked, some examples of damages due to space debris include damage of French satellite by debris from a rocket exploded a decade ago in 1996, and the destruction of functioning US Iridium satellite by collision with a defunct Russian satellite in 2009. Countries have also developed certain missions control maneuvers to avoid collisions of debris with the spacecraft or satellites. So in India currently, there is no democratic space policy governing issues of space liability and insurance. Liabilities related legislations are few in number. United Nations has published treaties governing space laws, requiring the number countries to ratify the treaties and to legislate suitable space laws in their respective countries. The 5 most important treaties of the United Nations are 1961 Treaty on Principles governing the activity of state in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. To note that India, USA, UK, France, China, etc. have ratified. Then 1968 Agreement on the Rescue of Astronauts, the Return of Astronauts and the Return of Objects launched into outer space. To note that India, USA, UK, France, China, etc. have ratified. Then in 1972 Convention on the International Liability for damage caused by space objects, that is Liability Convention. Then 1976 Conventions on Registration of Objects launched into outer space. And the last one is 1979 Agreement governing the activities of states on the moon and other celestial bodies. To note that India and France have signed while China has ratified. Our US, UK, Russia have not signed. So centered to share the insurance liability, Indian space companies under the aegis of the Indian Space Association are in discussion with the government on a shared liability model for third-party liability insurance for domestic satellites and rocket companies. Indian Space Research Organization, the liability is taken by government through a sovereign guarantee. So in the case of private sector, those who are wanting to offer services globally have to pay up in case of any damages in space. As per Director General of Indian Space Association, When private firms get into this business, some kind of insurance has to be taken by them. There are various options. For instance, private sector firms have to insure for up to a particular amount for liabilities and risk covered. So beyond that, government offers sovereign guarantee. The other way is to create a corpus fund to which the companies will contribute and it will be supported by the government. This will spread the risk. As ISRO, that is Indian Space Research Organization, always had a sovereign guarantee, none of the insurance firms have any policy on this. However, for satellites and rockets, there has to be third-party insurance. A similar structure was undertaken under the Indian Nuclear Insurance Pool, wherein General Insurance Corporation and other firms created a pool of rupees 1,500 crore to provide insurance to cover liabilities as prescribed under the Civil Liabilities for Nuclear Damage Act, which facilitated work in the new nuclear power plants. So the issue could be key to attracting foreign direct investment in India's space tech companies, especially since the government has finalized details of a more liberal FDI regime, which will be announced soon. So under the current policy, 100% FDI is allowed in satellites, but that is through the government route. So one has to take approval from the government, which may take 3 to 7 years. So the government is now working on a more liberal policy where, depending on the segment and activity, it could be in the automatic route in different domains, with a cap of 74% to 50%. Even in defense, they have gone up to 74%. So according to these reports, in crucial areas like rocket launches, the cap on the automatic route could be even lower, as the government might have to shoulder part of the liability risk. Clearly, space is not a low investment business. The satellite manufactured by Indian startups would cost around rupees 100 crore rupees. But the good thing is that venture capital and private equity funds are bullish on Indian space tech arms. According to SPA, $322 million has been raised, with around 80% of the investment coming into the space tech startups between 2021 until date, that is 23. So the number of these firms have also shot up to between 21 to 368, which means India is now in 5th place in the global pecking order, behind the UK, Canada and Germany. So homegrown companies have already made substantial progress. For instance, Ajista BST Aerospace, a joint venture between Ajista Industries and Berlin Space Technologies, is developing the capacity to manufacture small satellites in the 50 kilogram to 150 kilogram range. The factory is expected to make 250 satellites per year, and in June launched its first satellite through Elon Musk's SpaceX. So Hyderabad-based Dhruv Space, which is manufacturing small satellites, is now looking at raising $20 to 25 million in the next 1 to 2 years to build infrastructure to launch 100 kilogram satellites. It's now working 16 on putting satellites weighing 30 kilogram into orbit. So the developments are going on into the space liability. Thank you very much.